Welcome to the case of the Shanghai Shadow, a Sherlock Holmes adventure from the series Shadows of Empire. The unseen cases of Sherlock Holmes, playing in the year 1891. It is a curious sensation, I must confess, to find one's private correspondence and official reports, long consigned to the dusty archives of the Foreign Office, now brought to light for public perusal. These accounts, meticulously compiled from such recently declassified papers, a mixture of our own letters to government officials, intercepted communications, and formal reports, offer a glimpse into matters of grave imperial consequence. They chronicle a period, roughly from 1885 to the eve of the Great War, when the British Empire stood at its zenith. Yet its foundations were often shaken by the murky currents of colonial intrigue. Holmes and I frequently found ourselves navigating a complex web of loyalty and betrayal, from the opium dens of London's East End to the grand halls of colonial India, confronting the moral ambiguities of imperialism. These were not merely puzzles of domestic crime, but shadows cast by the empire itself, cases which might aptly be collected under the title Shadows of Empire, the unseen cases of Sherlock Holmes. Allow me, then, to commence with a most singular affair that drew us into the perilous currents of the East. I shall recount the particulars of what became known as the case of the Shanghai Shadow. Chapter 1. Mycroft's summons was unusual. A liveried footman, his face impassive, delivered a terse note requesting our immediate presence at the Diogenes Club. The air in Pall Mall seemed heavier that afternoon. A brooding sky muffled the usual clatter of hooves and carriage wheels. Even Holmes, usually unaffected by changes in atmosphere, remarked on the strange stillness as we climbed the steps to that quiet sanctuary. We were shown into the stranger's room. Mycroft occasionally made this concession when serious matters were at hand. He was already there, standing by the grand fireplace. Usually, the gentle crackle of its flames offered some comfort, but today the hearth was cold. Mycroft Holmes, a man of legendary intellect and composure, turned as we entered. His large frame, usually a picture of solid calm, seemed to sag slightly. The sharpness of his eyes was clouded by a shadow I had rarely seen. The usual rustle of newspapers from nearby rooms seemed a distant, almost irrelevant sound. When Mycroft spoke, his voice lacked its usual deep authority. It was lower and held an unfamiliar urgency. Sherlock, Dr. Watson, I appreciate your promptness. We face a matter of great seriousness, remarked Mycroft Holmes. Holmes replied, his tone sharp and observant. Your message suggested as much, Mycroft. You are rarely so brief unless the situation is truly dire, Sherlock Holmes noted. Mycroft gestured to a pair of chairs, but he remained standing. He paced slowly before the empty grate. For a moment, the only sound was the rhythmic tap of his shoes on the polished floor. Dire understates it, Sherlock. There have been incidents, 3 to be precise, prominent British merchants assassinated. The killings show military precision, leaving Scotland Yard baffled, answered Mycroft Holmes. I exclaimed. Assassinated? In London? Dr. John Watson inquired. They call it the Shanghai Shadow, said Mycroft Holmes. Holmes leaned forward, his eyes shining with sudden interest. The listlessness he had shown moments before vanished completely. Holmes mused, drawing out the syllables. The Shanghai Shadow, suggestive. And these merchants, Mycroft, what did they have in common besides their unfortunate deaths? Sherlock Holmes noted. Mycroft sighed. It was a sound like wind through dry reeds. On the surface, their business interests seemed varied. Shipping, textiles, imports, but all had major dealings in the East, specifically with the opium trade, remarked Mycroft Holmes. Holmes steepled his fingers, his gaze fixed on his brother. The faint scent of old leather and floor polish hung heavily in the air. Holmes spoke softly, a note of growing understanding in his voice. Ah, the pattern begins to emerge. Men who profit from the poppy, cut down by a phantom from the east. It has a certain grim poetry. And the latest victim, Mycroft. Your unusual distress suggests a more personal connection. Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. A flicker of pain crossed Mycroft's face. He stopped pacing and faced us directly, his hands clasped tightly behind his back. Mycroft's voice was strained, almost a whisper. Sir Alistair Finch. He was an associate, a valuable one. His death this morning has sent ripples through circles that, at all costs, must remain undisturbed. This Shanghai shadow, whatever it is, must be identified. Its motives must be revealed and its operations stopped. Your unique talents, Sherlock, are not just requested, they are critically needed, Mycroft Holmes said. Holmes rose to his feet. His voice was now brisk and businesslike. Then tell me, Mycroft, where did Sir Alistair meet his end? Our investigation into this elusive shadow must begin at the scene of this latest tragedy, declared Sherlock Holmes. The challenge was set. The game was clearly afoot. As we prepared to leave the quiet confines of the Diogenes Club, I felt that familiar thrill of anticipation. It was mixed with a sober concern for the dark paths this Shanghai shadow would surely lead us down. The chill of the November morning bit deep. Our hansom clattered over uneven cobbles towards the Thames, enveloped by a thick, yellow fog, the very breath of London itself. It muffled the sounds of the awakening city, transforming the familiar riverside into a realm of shadows and disquiet. The air was heavy with brine, damp wood, and the distant, mournful call of a ship's horn that echoed across unseen waters. Mycroft's grave words from the previous evening still resonated in my mind. His warning of a Shanghai shadow, lending a particularly sinister cast to our grim errand. We alighted near a desolate stretch of warehouses. Their gaunt silhouettes were barely discernible in the gloom. A constant, mournful sound arose, the lapping of the unseen river against slimy dark pilings, a sound punctuated by the occasional creak of timbers. Inspector Davies of Scotland Yard awaited us. He was a stout man, collar turned high against the damp, his expression perpetually harassed. Inspector Davies' voice was gruff, attempting a confidence it did not quite possess as he spoke. Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, a nasty business. Found him by the night watchman not an hour past dawn. Looks like a simple robbery gone awry to me, responded Inspector Davies. Holmes offered no immediate reply. His keen eyes swept the scene. The damp cobblestones, a dark stain near rotting crates, the general disarray. The victim, Mr. Alistair Finch, lay partially covered by a tarpaulin. His features were contorted in his final moments. The pervasive odor of the river mingled with another scent, something acrid and faintly metallic. When Holmes finally spoke, his voice low and resonant, he remarked dryly, "Simplicity, Inspector, is often a refuge for the unimaginative." "May I?" Sherlock Holmes noted. Without waiting for a reply, Holmes knelt beside the body. His examination was swift, yet incredibly thorough. Long, nimble fingers probed. His gaze missed nothing. Davies huffed, a small cloud of vapor escaping his lips in the cold air, but he remained silent. Then, as Holmes carefully shifted the victim's collar, my attention was drawn to a peculiar mark. Upon the exposed skin of the neck, just below the ear, was a faint etching. It was almost a scratch, yet its design seemed deliberate, a stylized, three-pronged shape, like a miniature claw. I spoke, my voice quiet. "Holmes, do you see this? This mark here," remarked Dr. John Watson. Holmes glanced briefly at the mark. His eyes narrowed for a fraction of a second before returning to his primary focus on the body. "Noted, Watson. Interesting," stated Sherlock Holmes. He then let out a soft exclamation, not of surprise, but of discovery. His attention had shifted. He had found something embedded in the thick wood of an adjacent crate, something small and dark. Carefully, using his pocket-knife, Holmes worked it free. It was a dart, no more than 3 inches long. Fashioned from a dark, almost black wood, it bore intricate, almost microscopic carvings along its shaft. The tip was needle-sharp and discolored, hinting at a sinister purpose. Holmes held the dart up, turning it slowly between his fingers. "Behold, Inspector, does this resemble any weapon typically found in the possession of your common dark-side thief?" deduced Sherlock Holmes. Davies peered at the object, his brow furrowed. "Can't say I've seen its like. Foreign, I'd wager, but a dart, hardly a fatal weapon unless," responded Inspector Davies. Holmes's voice was edged with a familiar sharpness. "Unless, Inspector, it is coated with a substance that ensures fatality. Observe the craftsmanship, the unique material. This is no random missile. This, I suspect, is a signature, a calling card, perhaps, of this Shanghai shadow Mycroft spoke of." Sherlock Holmes noted. Davies shifted uncomfortably. The sound of his heavy boots scraping on the gritty ground was loud in the fog-muffled quiet that had fallen. Davies grumbled, unconvinced. "A Shanghai shadow. Mr. Holmes, with all due respect, that sounds like something from a penny dreadful. We're dealing with murder, plain and simple. Likely some dispute over illicit goods. These merchants, well, they dabble, don't they?" Inspector Davies answered. Holmes straightened. His gaze seemed distant, as if looking beyond the fog-bound docks to a far more complex landscape of intrigue. A moment later, the sharp clang of metal on metal from a nearby shipyard cut through the heavy air, punctuating the silence. "The opium trade is indeed a murky business, Inspector, fraught with peril and populated by desperate men. Yet this dart, and indeed the mark Watson observed, speaks of a refinement, a precision that transcends common thuggery. These are not the clumsy efforts of a dark-side brute, but the calculated actions of a skilled hand, an artist in their grim profession. Precisely the hallmarks one might expect from this Shanghai shadow we are hunting," Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. Holmes pocketed the dart carefully within an evidence envelope produced from his coat. The fog seemed to press in closer around us, the world shrinking to this small, damp stage of death and mystery. The only sounds were our hushed breaths and the ever-present lapping of the Thames. Holmes continued, his tone now brisk and businesslike. "Our victim, Mr. Finch, moved in circles beyond these docks. To understand the motive, we must understand the man and his associations. Watson, our inquiries here are concluded for the nonce. We must delve into the society he kept. There are always whispers in the drawing-rooms that never reach the ears of Scotland Yard," Sherlock Holmes said. I understood his implication. The next stage of our investigation would take us from the grime of the riverside into the more polished echelons of London society, a realm potentially no less dangerous. The game, as Holmes often remarked, was decidedly afoot. The chill of the previous day's investigation at the docks still clung to me as our hansom drew up before an elegant Mayfair residence. A uniformed footman, whose solemnity seemed to mirror the gravity of our errand, admitted us to a drawing-room where the quiet tick of a rather ornate mantel clock was the loudest sound. Sunshine, pale and wintry, filtered through lace curtains, illuminating the tasteful, if somewhat somber, furnishings. Lady Beatrice Foxglove entered, a figure of quiet dignity in mourning attire. Her face, though etched with recent sorrow, retained a composed beauty, but her eyes held a flicker of apprehension as she regarded my companion. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," Lady Foxglove's voice wavered slightly. "Thank you for coming. This whole affair has been a terrible shock," responded Lady Beatrice Foxglove. His own voice was gentle, a contrast to his usual briskness. "Indeed, Lady Foxglove, a most trying time, I am certain. Yet your unique perspective, your intimate knowledge, may be the very key to unlocking the truth behind these tragic events," Sherlock Holmes noted. She gestured for us to be seated, the rustle of her silk dress a soft counterpoint to the room's stillness. A delicate porcelain tea service sat untouched on a nearby table, as if the rituals of society had been suspended by grief. My late husband, Sir Reginald, and Mr. Albright, Lord Cavendish. Yes, they were close associates. In business, naturally. But beyond their usual commercial dealings, I truly know very little of substance, Lady Beatrice Foxglove replied. His tone, though still gentle, acquired a new edge. Lady Foxglove, these commercial dealings you mention, were they always entirely transparent? Or were there, perhaps, shared ventures of a more discreet nature? Replied Sherlock Holmes. A shadow seemed to pass over Lady Foxglove's features. She paused, her fingers tracing the arm of her chair. I sensed a reticence, a discomfort that went beyond mere sorrow. Her reply came after a noticeable pause, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. There was something else. A consortium, Mr. Holmes. A significant financial pool, Sir Reginald, Mr. Albright, Lord Cavendish were all involved. They spoke of it rarely and always in hushed tones. Something concerning their interests in the East. Immensely profitable, I gathered, yet they were never truly at ease discussing its specifics, answered Lady Beatrice Foxglove. Holmes leaned forward, his eyes alight. Interests in the East, he murmured, almost to himself, the words hanging heavy in the air, thick with the unspoken implications of the opium trade. I observed Lady Foxglove's slight frown. She was clearly navigating a difficult line between loyalty and a deeper, moral disquiet regarding such ventures. His voice quickened slightly. And this consortium, Lady Foxglove, did its members convene recently? Perhaps for a meeting outside their usual city haunts, Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. She nodded, her gaze distant. Yes, only a week before the first terrible news. Sir Reginald spoke of a private gathering. He was uncharacteristically secretive, Mr. Holmes, merely stating it was of utmost importance to their shared enterprise. He returned very late that night, and I recall he seemed deeply perturbed, said Lady Beatrice Foxglove. Holmes sat back, a glint of triumph in his eyes. The pieces were beginning to form a coherent, if alarming, picture. He leaned forward, his voice low and intense. His voice became crisp, charged with a sudden, vibrant energy. A shared financial instrument, Watson, of considerable value, its details known only to them. A clandestine meeting shortly before their systematic elimination. This is no mere string of isolated tragedies. This, my dear fellow, screams of a concerted effort, a meticulously planned conspiracy targeting the very heart of their lucrative and evidently perilous operations, explained Sherlock Holmes. The air in the elegant drawing-room seemed suddenly colder. Lady Foxglove looked pale, the implications of Holmes's words clearly dawning upon her. The implications struck me with force. Good heavens, Holmes, I exclaimed, the true scale of the affair expanding ominously in my mind. A conspiracy, you say, but of what nature? And by whom? Dr. John Watson replied. He rose, his gaze already distant, fixed on the unseen path ahead. That, my dear Watson, is precisely what we must now dedicate ourselves to uncovering. Lady Foxglove has gifted us a most significant thread. The very nature of their shared enterprise, these Eastern interests, dictates our next inquiries. We must delve into quarters more directly connected with such commerce. The tentacles of this affair, I am now certain, stretch deep into the murkier depths of London, stated Sherlock Holmes. With our thanks offered and condolences renewed, we took our leave. As the door of the Mayfair residence closed behind us, the sounds of the bustling city seemed to carry a new note of menace. Holmes was silent for a time as our cab rattled over the cobblestones, but I knew his mind was already racing, charting a course through the shadows towards the source of this deadly conspiracy. A course that would inevitably lead us, I felt, towards the notorious district of Limehouse. The revelations from Lady Foxglove had cast a somber hue over our Baker Street rooms. It was with a grim sense of purpose that Holmes announced our next destination. Limehouse, Watson, he had declared, his voice sharp with intent, where the tendrils of the Orient meet the grimy heart of London. It is there we shall seek the shadows. And so, under the cloak of a damp, clinging evening, we found ourselves navigating the labyrinthine alleys of that notorious district. The air clung to us like a shroud, thick with the cloying sweetness of cheap perfume and the acrid tang of opium smoke. From unseen doorways came the murmur of voices in languages I did not comprehend. The occasional mournful wail of an ahoo drifted through the oppressive fog, a sound that spoke of distant lands and profound sorrows. The greasy cobbles beneath our feet were slick, and the dim gas lamps cast elongated, dancing shadows that seemed to writhe with a life of their own. We must be vigilant, Watson. This is a place where secrets are currency and lives are cheap, observed Sherlock Holmes. His tone was low, yet carried a distinct edge of caution. After a series of discreet inquiries, conducted by Holmes with a facility that always astonished me, we were directed to a narrow, unassuming doorway, barely discernible in the gloom. A few hushed words, a knowing glance exchanged, and we were admitted into a long, dimly lit corridor. The scent of opium grew stronger here, almost overpowering. We were ushered into a small, private chamber at the rear. A man rose to greet us. He was of Chinese descent, his face etched with lines of sorrow, yet retaining an air of quiet dignity. His dark, intelligent eyes appraised us keenly. "Mr. Holmes, I presume, and Dr. Watson. I am Lin Feng. Please be seated," Mr. Lin Feng said. His voice was measured, tinged with an accent that spoke of his origins and carried a weight of unspoken grief. The room was sparsely furnished, yet clean. A single oil lamp cast flickering light upon his features. "Mr. Lin, we are indebted to you for agreeing to this meeting. We understand you may possess information pertinent to our inquiries into the recent, unfortunate deaths of several merchants," declared Sherlock Holmes. "Unfortunate for them, perhaps. For my community, for my family, their trade has brought only ruin," remarked Mr. Lin Feng. A tremor of profound bitterness entered his voice, his composure momentarily shaken. He paused, collecting himself, before continuing in that same grave tone. "My father, a respected merchant in Canton, was destroyed by the greed these men represented. Our family name, shamed. Our livelihood, gone. The poison they peddle has seeped into the very heart of my people, here and in my homeland. You seek a killer, Mr. Holmes. I seek justice against an entire enterprise. You call it murder. I call it a consequence. The men who died were cogs in a vast machine, a network some here whisper of as the Shanghai Shadow. It is not one man, but an organization, ruthless and far-reaching," said Mr. Lin Feng. Holmes leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with interest. The information that the Shanghai Shadow was an organization, not a lone assassin, was clearly of significance. "An organization, you say? This clarifies much. And you are willing to assist us in exposing them, Mr. Lin," Sherlock Holmes pointed out. "My motives are my own, Mr. Holmes, born of loss and a desire to see this blight eradicated. I can tell you that recently there has been disquiet. Talk of a particularly valuable shipment, the Yunnan Emperor, which was due on the clipper Jade Wind. Its arrival, or lack thereof, has caused considerable agitation amongst those who profit from such misery. The men who were killed were all investors, I believe, in that specific venture," replied Mr. Lin Feng. Holmes sat back, his fingers steepled. My own eyes caught a faint dusting of unusual dark tobacco ash upon the small table beside Mr. Lin, a coarse, blackish flake, quite unlike the fine grey ash of any English tobacco. I saw Holmes's gaze, however, do more than merely flicker. It sharpened, lingering on the residue for a pregnant second. His nostrils twitched almost imperceptibly. Though he made no comment, I knew that peculiar ash had been meticulously catalogued in the vast archives of his mind, marked as a detail of potential significance. The Yunnan Emperor, you say, and the Jade Wind. Interesting. Mr. Lin, your candor is most helpful. The convergence of a specific, high-value shipment and the coordinated elimination of its key British investors suggests a meticulously planned operation to seize control of that cargo, or perhaps silence those who knew too much about its true nature or destination. The Shanghai shadow is indeed formidable, Sherlock Holmes said. As we took our leave, we emerged once more into the misty warren of Limehouse. The mournful cry of a ship's horn echoed from the Thames. Holmes was silent for a time, his brow furrowed in thought. The air still felt heavy with unspoken threats. An organization, Watson, with resources and a ruthlessness that speaks of military precision. Such enemies require a particular kind of foresight, a deeper understanding of their methods. His words hung in the damp air, and I felt a chill that had little to do with the night's temperature. I sensed that the information gleaned from Mr. Lin Feng had provided Holmes with a crucial piece of the puzzle. It was a piece that might soon lead him to re-examine every facet of this dark and complex affair, perhaps even the smallest, most overlooked clues we had hitherto gathered. The day after our unsettling visit to Limehouse, I found Holmes deeply engrossed in examining the peculiar dot from the second merchant's murder scene. As I entered our Baker Street rooms, the sharp yet not wholly unpleasant odor of his chemical experiments assailed my nostrils. The usual London symphony played on. The distant rumble of omnibuses, the cry of a newsboy, the clatter of hooves on wet cobblestones. Yet, all this seemed a world away from the intense concentration radiating from my friend as he bent over his test tubes and microscope. I had been attempting to read the morning's paper, but my attention was drawn repeatedly to Holmes, his brow furrowed, his thin lips set in a determined line. Suddenly he straightened, a queer light in his keen eyes. A faint hiss from a spirit lamp ceasing its labor was the only sound for a moment. His voice, when he spoke, was low but resonant with an undercurrent of triumph. "Watson, I believe our shadow begins to take a more definite form," explained Sherlock Holmes. He held up a small glass slide. Even from my armchair, I could perceive a minuscule crystalline deposit upon it. "The substance on this dart's tip," he continued precisely, "is a potent, rare vegetable alkaloid. It's exceedingly difficult to isolate, and most importantly, comes from the Aconitum yunnensis, a plant found only in China's remote Yunnan highlands," explained Sherlock Holmes. "Yunnan," I echoed, the name stirring some vague recollection. "But how can you be so certain, Holmes?" responded Dr. John Watson. He smiled faintly, a spark of intellectual fire in his gaze. "My monograph on the alkaloids, Watson, though perhaps not a bestseller, has its practical applications. The crystalline structure is unique. But more than that, consider this particular poison, and indeed the very design of this slender dot. It is light, perfectly balanced for a blowpipe, and fletched with a peculiar parrot feather. These details bring to mind a name I have not had cause to utter for some years. Colonel Sebastian Moran," explained Sherlock Holmes. A chill permeated the room despite the cheerful crackle from our hearth. Moran. The name was synonymous with cold-blooded evil, the second most dangerous man in London, as Holmes had once described him. "Moran," I exclaimed, my voice hushed. "But what connection has he with Yunnan?" Dr. John Watson commented. Holmes gestured towards his meticulously indexed collection of biographical records. "If you would be so good, Watson, consult the file pertaining to his military service. You will find, I believe, that Colonel Moran spent a considerable period, upwards of 3 years, stationed on a special assignment in the very region of Yunnan from which this toxin originates. This assignment, I might add, was shrouded in considerable secrecy. From it, he returned with a disturbing familiarity with esoteric local practices. These included the preparation of precisely this type of poison and its delivery via such a dart. Indeed, it was whispered, He adapted the local blowpipe techniques for his own nefarious purposes. Sherlock Holmes noted. I rose at once, and after a brief search amidst the neatly arranged files, located the dossier on the infamous colonel. The rustle of papers filled the ensuing silence as I scanned the contents. The official records were sparse, just as Holmes had intimated. However, supplementary notes in his own spidery hand, gleaned from sources unknown to me, painted a more vivid picture. You are correct, Holmes, I confirmed, my voice heavy with the implication. He was indeed there from 1878 to 1881. There are mentions of his ethnographic studies and pacification duties in remote tribal areas of Yunnan. It certainly corroborates his prolonged presence and potential access. Asked Dr. John Watson. Holmes nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the dart he still held. It is more than mere access, Watson. The method of preparing this specific poison involves a subtle refinement. This refinement includes a particular additive I once detected in another of Moran's little enterprises, an affair never brought fully to light, concerning the untimely demise of a certain Himalayan explorer. It is akin to a signature, almost invisible to the untrained eye. Yet, to one who has studied Moran's methods, it is as distinctive as his handwriting. This is not the work of some common assassin, nor even a native practitioner. No, this is the calculated artistry of Colonel Sebastian Moran, employing the deadly skills he acquired in the East. The Shanghai shadow, it would appear, has a very long and very dangerous reach indeed, stated Sherlock Holmes. The pieces were falling into place with a grim certainty. The opium trade, the Chinese connection hinted at by Mr. Lin Feng, and now the spectral hand of Colonel Moran. A formidable alliance of criminality was arrayed against us. The air in our rooms seemed to grow colder, the silence outside more profound, as if London itself held its breath, awaiting the next move in this deadly game. The previous evening's revelations concerning Colonel Moran and the Yunnan poison had cast a grim shadow over our Baker Street rooms. The faint, acrid scent of Holmes's recent chemical experiments did little to dispel the gloom. Holmes, however, seemed energized by the confirmation of his nemesis's hand. He paced before the hearth, the rhythmic tap of his slippers on the worn floorboards a counterpoint to the distant, mournful cry of a foghorn from the Thames. It was well past midnight, the city outside hushed save for that lonely sound, when a sudden, urgent knocking echoed from downstairs, followed by Mrs. Hudson's flustered tones. A moment later, Mr. Lin Feng was ushered in, the sound of his hurried footsteps preceding him. His usually immaculate silk attire was creased and somewhat disarrayed, a fine sheen of perspiration glistening on his brow despite the chill of the late hour. His breath came in short, sharp bursts, his voice strained and low as he addressed Holmes. It was clear his customary reserve had been breached by some profound alarm. Mr. Holmes, I beg your pardon for this untimely intrusion. I come bearing news of the utmost gravity. Another soul is marked for death, and the hour of his demise is set for this very night, responded Mr. Lin Feng. Holmes's eyes narrowed, his entire demeanor snapping to keen attention. Compose yourself, Mr. Lin, though I perceive the grave urgency in your eyes and bearing. Pray, continue. Your trust, and indeed your courage in coming here at such an hour, is valued. Who is the target, and what is your source? Every second may count, explained Sherlock Holmes. Mr. Lin Feng, his agitation still palpable in the tremor of his hands and the hushed, urgent tone of his voice, recounted how a trusted contact deep within the shadowy networks of the opium trade had, at great personal risk, relayed a whispered warning. Sir Humphrey Carruthers, a prominent city magnate known for his extensive, and some said ruthless, dealings in the East, was to be the next victim. The attack, Lin Feng explained, was planned for that very night at Carruthers's usual haunt, the prestigious Albion Club in Pall Mall. My informant, who risked everything, his very life to bring me this warning, spoke of a shadow operative, a phantom, almost one known for swift, silent work. A whisper in the dark, and then death. Your unwavering dedication, Mr. Holmes, to exposing these vipers, it has given courage to some. It has encouraged certain elements within the trade to confide where previously fear held their tongues in an iron grip. Mr. Lin Feng replied. Holmes glanced at the mantelpiece clock, its ticking suddenly loud in the charged air of the room. His voice was crisp and decisive. The Albion Club, Sir Humphrey Carruthers. We have perhaps an hour, Watson, no more. Are you prepared for what may come? Stated Sherlock Holmes. Ready as ever, Holmes, when you lead the way, remarked Dr. John Watson. Excellent. The game is afoot, and the stakes, it would appear, are higher than ever. Mr. Lin, you have performed an invaluable service this night. Your courage will not be forgotten, observed Sherlock Holmes. A hansom was swiftly procured. The chill night air, thick with the scent of wet stone and distant coal smoke, whipped at our faces as its wheels clattered urgently over the damp, slick cobblestones, each sound echoing in the otherwise quiet streets as we sped towards Pall Mall. The Albion Club, when we reached it, was an edifice of quiet, imposing dignity, its tall windows casting a warm, inviting glow onto the misty, gaslit street. Holmes, his expression grimly set, instructed me to watch the main entrance whilst he sought a vantage point covering the rear service door, a known discreet entry often used by members seeking to avoid notice. Inside the opulent smoking room, a hush hung in the air, broken only by the occasional rustle of paper. Sir Humphrey Carruthers, a portly gentleman with a complexion as florid as a ripe plum, sat ensconced in a deep leather armchair. The crisp folds of his newspaper obscured his features, creating a fortress of oblivious tranquility around him. Dim gaslight cast long, dancing shadows from the heavy mahogany furniture. The air was thick with the mingled scents of rich Havana tobacco, old leather, and fine brandy, punctuated by the occasional soft clink of a glass, or the low, indistinct murmur of conversation from other members scattered throughout the room. Minutes stretched into an eternity, each ponderous tick of the grandfather clock in the hall amplifying the palpable tension that gripped me. Then I saw him, a figure nondescript in dress, yet moving with a silent, fluid grace that belied his ordinary appearance, detached himself from the deeper shadows near a large, leafy potted palm. He made no sound on the thick, patterned carpet. He carried a small, elegant, silver-tipped cane. As he neared Carruthers, his pace did not alter, but there was an undeniable, chilling, predatory focus in his posture, his gaze fixed upon his unsuspecting target. My breath caught. I saw the faint glint of polished metal emerging from the cane's ferrule, a dart, slender and wicked, identical to the one that had claimed previous victims. My shout was abrupt, a raw sound shattering the club's genteel quiet. Holmes, now, by heavens, man, look out, asked Dr. John Watson. Holmes was already in motion, appearing as if from nowhere, a grey streak against the dim light. The assassin, startled by my cry, reacted with inhuman speed. He flicked the dart with incredible velocity, not at Carruthers, who had started violently in alarm, a sharp gasp escaping him, but towards Holmes himself. My friend sidestepped with lightning agility, the tiny, venomous projectile whizzing past his ear with a faint hiss to embed itself deep in the dark oak paneling with a soft, sickening thud. The assassin, without a moment's hesitation, his face a fleeting mask of cold fury, turned and bolted towards a side corridor leading to the kitchens, his movements swift and sure. We gave chase, the sudden clatter of our boots echoing through the now startled club, members rising from their chairs in confusion and alarm. The man was astonishingly swift and knew the club's labyrinthine layout intimately. He burst through a heavy service door into a narrow, rain-slicked alleyway, the damp, fetid air of it striking our faces. A pre-placed rope ladder, its dark rungs almost invisible against the grimy, soot-stained brickwork, offered his escape route to the shadowy rooftops. By the time we reached the alley's entrance, he was but a fleeting shadow against the intermittently moonlit clouds, then utterly gone, swallowed by the London night. Holmes stood for a long moment, gazing up at the empty, rain-swept roofline, his breath forming visible plumes in the cold, damp air. His voice, when he finally spoke, was tight with a mixture of profound frustration and grim respect. Extraordinary. The agility of a panther, the foresight of a chess grandmaster to have such an escape route meticulously prepared. This was no common cutthroat Watson, blundering in the dark. This was a highly trained operative, disciplined, resourceful, and utterly ruthless. A key piece, I fear, in Moran's poisonous game, and one who clearly knows his value to that organization. Sherlock Holmes noted. Sir Humphrey Carruthers, his florid face now a pasty white, and his voice trembling, was profuse, almost babbling in his thanks. But as we left the Albion Club, the sounds of consternation and the arrival of the constabulary fading behind us, the elation of the rescue was heavily tempered by the chilling efficiency and cunning of our adversary. The Shanghai Shadow Network, it was now terrifyingly clear, was even more formidable, its operatives more lethally skilled than even Holmes had perhaps fully anticipated. As we walked through the damp, echoing streets towards Baker Street, Holmes's voice was low, almost a murmur to himself, yet edged with steel. "We saved a life tonight, Watson, and that is a victory, however small it may feel against such a foe. But the viper remains coiled, ready to strike again, perhaps even more viciously," replied Sherlock Holmes, "and seemingly more elusive than ever, Holmes. This operative was a veritable ghost, prepared for every eventuality." Dr. John Watson replied, "Indeed, Watson. His escape was a testament to meticulous planning, which tells us we need more than mere reaction, more than simply foiling individual attempts, however vital. We must understand the very structure of this insidious organization, its roots, its reach, its resources. I suspect Mycroft's peculiar access to certain, less conventional channels of information may soon prove indispensable if we are to truly unmask the Shanghai shadow and confront Moran himself." Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. The hansome's wheels crunched on the gravel as it deposited us before the somber edifice of the Diogenes Club, a place where silence was not merely golden, but an ironclad rule. Inside, the air hung heavy and still. The distant, rhythmic tick-tock of a grandfather clock seemed to measure the profound quiet, broken only by the occasional rustle of a newspaper from the stranger's room, a faint whisper in the vast, book-lined chamber where Mycroft awaited us. He sat, a monumental figure in his usual armchair, the soft glow of a gas lamp glinting off the polished wood. A sheaf of papers lay upon his lap, though his brow was furrowed with an anxiety that even his formidable composure could not entirely conceal. His voice, when he spoke, was a low rumble, barely disturbing the profound quiet. "Sherlock, Dr. Watson, I am glad you came so promptly. This arrived through channels I would rather not discuss, given its delicate nature and the potential to further inflame, shall we say, already strained relations concerning our Eastern commerce. It pertains, I believe, directly to your Shanghai shadow," Mycroft Holmes said. Holmes took the proffered documents, the crisp paper rustling softly as his keen eyes scanned the dense columns of what appeared to be Chinese characters, interspersed with cryptic symbols and numerals. He spread them upon a nearby mahogany table, its polished surface reflecting his sharp, hawk-like profile in the dim light. A faint scent of old leather, beeswax polish, and Mycroft's preferred Turkish tobacco permeated the air. "A cipher, and a complex one at that," he murmured, more to himself than to us. "The hand of a meticulous, intelligent adversary is evident here. The near escape of their operative last week spoke volumes of their caliber," Sherlock Holmes said. For a considerable time, the silence of the room was punctuated only by the faint, rhythmic scratching of Holmes's pencil as he made notes upon his own pad, and the almost inaudible, restless drumming of Mycroft's fingers upon the leather arm of his chair. The occasional sigh of the building settling around us seemed to deepen the quiet. Then Holmes straightened, a spark of triumph in his eyes. "Observe, Watson, Mycroft. This recurring ideogram, always paired with three numbers. Not a simple substitution, mind you. No, its nature is twofold, phonetic and symbolic. It cross-references a Cantonese trade glossary I encountered in the Henderson case. The numbers, page, line, and word, I'd wager. Quite the devilish contrivance." Mycroft leaned forward, his bulk shifting in the creaking leather, his gaze fixed upon Holmes's swift-moving pencil. The tension in the room was palpable, a stark contrast to the club's usual somnolence. "Astounding, Sherlock. Some of these decoded phrases. The Azure Dragon reports favorable tides." That codename, Azure Dragon, has surfaced in dispatches concerning illicit opium shipments bypassing official channels. The Foreign Office has been particularly troubled, not merely by the leaks suggesting a high-level informant within certain British trading houses, but by the increasing difficulty in maintaining the facade of legitimate trade, while such vast quantities of opium flood into China against their government's will. It fuels the very resentment this Shanghai shadow seems to embody, said Mycroft Holmes. "Precisely, Mycroft. Your intelligence corroborates the pattern. The favorable tides refer not to the weather, but to customs officials successfully bribed, a corruption that festers where the immense profits of the opium trade meet desperate or greedy men, further weakening Chinese attempts to control the influx. And here, the phoenix feather to rendezvous with the iron serpent at Shadwell Basin. More operatives, no doubt. The iron serpent that has Moran's brutal poetry about it, does it not?" Sherlock Holmes said. Holmes continued, his voice quickening as the pieces fell into place, his finger tracing lines across the deciphered documents. He explained the shipping routes, how they cleverly used smaller, less scrutinized vessels for the final legs of their journeys into London's sprawling docklands, arteries of a commerce that brought immense wealth to British coffers while sowing addiction and despair in China. He pointed out meeting points disguised in everyday language: a certain tea house in Limehouse, a specific stall in Leadenhall Market, used as dead drops for messages or goods, the meticulous organization of the Shanghai shadow, a dark reflection of the vast, morally ambiguous trade network it exploited, was laid bare before us, the rustle of the papers the only sound accompanying his revelations. "But this, gentlemen," he declared, his finger stabbing at a final, complex passage, "this is the crux, an operation codenamed Nightingale's Song. It details a significant transfer of bullion payment, I suspect, for services rendered by Moran's network, scheduled for tomorrow evening. The location, West India Docks, Warehouse 7, explained Sherlock Holmes. "Tomorrow evening," I exclaimed, the audacity of it sending a chill down my spine. "So soon," Dr. John Watson said. Mycroft's expression was grim. "The West India Docks are a nerve center for our eastern trade. Any major disruption there, particularly involving bullion derived from that trade, would have significant repercussions. This goes beyond mere assassination, Sherlock. This is economic warfare, striking at the heart of a system some in Britain champion as free enterprise, while many in China decry it as a source of national degradation. The loss of such a sum, or its capture by this shadow organization, would send dangerous ripples through the city and Whitehall, and perhaps embolden further resistance to British interests in the East," replied Mycroft Holmes. The weight of our discovery hung heavy in the air, like the club's ever-present tobacco smoke. Holmes's Western logic had unraveled the cipher's Eastern mysteries, but our path forward was treacherous. Moran's reputation for brutality was well earned, and his Shanghai shadow agents had already demonstrated their lethal skills. Holmes's voice cut through the ensuing silence, sharp and decisive. Then we must ensure that the nightingale's song is never sung, Watson. We intercept this transfer. It is our best opportunity to ensnare not only the underlings, but perhaps Moran himself, or at least cripple his London operations. Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. His gaze met mine, and I knew that the following night would find us amidst the shadowy labyrinth of the docks, facing an enemy as cunning as any we had encountered, an enemy forged in the crucible of international tensions and the morally fraught opium trade. Outside, the muffled rumble of a passing carriage on the distant London streets was a faint reminder of the world beyond the club's quiet walls, a world whose prosperity was, for some, inextricably linked to the very conflicts we were about to confront. The game, as Holmes was so fond of saying, was once more afoot. The chill air of the November night bit at our faces. Holmes and I made our way through labyrinthine alleys leading to the Thames. A miasma hung heavy river damp, decaying refuse, and the pervasive scent of coal smoke. A grim perfume for the grim business we anticipated. The decoded Shanghai cipher had pointed unequivocally to this desolate stretch of wharves, a notorious haunt for smugglers and other night birds. Holmes moved with a silent, feline grace, his tall figure a mere shadow amongst deeper shadows, whilst I confess my own boots seemed to find every loose cobble and discarded piece of debris. The distant, mournful hoot of a tug navigating the black waters punctuated the oppressive silence. He paused by a stack of rotting crates, his voice a low murmur that barely disturbed the quiet. "They will not be long now, Watson. The tide serves them, and the cipher was explicit regarding the timing of this particular shipment," stated Sherlock Holmes. We settled into our cold vigil, concealed behind a high wall overlooking a derelict pier. The lapping of the dark Thames water against the slimy pilings was a constant, unsettling sound, occasionally joined by the scuttling of some unseen creature in the darkness. Time stretched, measured only by the slow drift of the stars visible through a break in the grimy London sky. My fingers grew numb, and I shifted uncomfortably, earning a minute, almost imperceptible, shake of the head from my companion. Suddenly his hand gripped my arm. "There," he breathed, his voice sharp with anticipation. The lighter, just as Mycroft's intelligence indicated. No lights aboard, most circumspect. Observe their approach, hugging the shadows of the warehouses, replied Sherlock Holmes. A low, flat-bottomed boat, barely visible against the inky water, glided towards the pier. Figures moved upon its deck, silent and purposeful. As they began to moor, 3 more men emerged from the deeper shadows of a nearby warehouse. Their hushed voices carried faintly on the damp air, a low, guttural tongue I did not recognize. They were clearly expecting the vessel. The moment the first crate was being manhandled onto the quay, Holmes moved. "Now, Watson," he called, his voice cutting through the night like a whip crack as he sprang from our concealment. The scene erupted into sudden, brutal violence. The smugglers, taken by surprise, reacted with feral swiftness. I heard the sickening thud of a carsh, a grunt of pain, and the clatter of a dropped weapon. I drew my service revolver, though in the close, desperate melee, a clear shot was impossible. Holmes was a whirlwind of focused energy, his cane a blur, deflecting a blow here, delivering a disabling jab there. I engaged a burly ruffian who lunged at me with a wicked-looking blade, the glint of steel uncomfortably close to my face, before I managed to send him sprawling with a well-aimed blow from my own stout stick. The fight was short, sharp, and merciless. Within moments, 2 of the smugglers lay groaning on the wet stones. A third had fled into the darkness, and the fourth, who had grappled fiercely with Holmes, was down, clutching his side, a dark stain spreading rapidly on his rough jacket. Holmes stood over him, breathing a little heavily but otherwise composed. I, however, saw the gravity of the man's injury. My medical instincts overriding all else, I knelt beside him. His face was pale and contorted with pain, his breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with fear and agony. "Help! Me!" he rasped, his voice barely a whisper. "Dying smuggler," replied. As I attempted to staunch the flow of blood, applying pressure to the wound, his gaze fixed on mine with a desperate intensity. Perhaps it was the unexpected kindness, or the stark realization of his own mortality. His words came in broken spurts, a torrent of confession. "The ledger, Moran's ledger," replied dying smuggler. He gasped. "Saffron Hill, the apothecary, under the sign of the sleeping dragon," dying smuggler answered, another ragged breath. "It lists everything, payments, names," said dying smuggler. His voice trailed off into a rattling cough, and his eyes began to glaze. I felt for a pulse, but it was faint and thready. Holmes had moved closer, his expression unreadable as he listened to the dying man's words. He spoke then, his tone devoid of emotion, yet carrying an undercurrent of profound satisfaction. "That, Watson, is a piece of intelligence we should never have gained through mere observation or deduction." The cipher alluded to financial intricacies, but this is Moran's operational blueprint within the opium network. A direct testimony given under the shadow of death is irrefutable. "No informant would have dared breathe a word of such a ledger," remarked Sherlock Holmes. The police whistles were shrilling in the distance now, summoned, no doubt, by the commotion. As we withdrew from the scene, leaving the grim aftermath to the authorities, the weight of the smuggler's final words settled upon me. The abstract threat of the Shanghai shadow was coalescing into something far more tangible, its tendrils reaching deep into the heart of London. "Our path is clear, Watson," Holmes stated, his voice firm as we emerged onto a slightly more reputable thoroughfare. "Tomorrow, we follow this fetid stream to its source. The opium trail begins at Saffron Hill, and I suspect it will lead us through the very darkest veins of this city, exposing the rot that festers beneath its gilded surface," explained Sherlock Holmes. The grievously injured smuggler at the docks, his lifeblood ebbing away, had gasped out a name: Finnegan's Rest, a public house in the warren of streets near Limehouse. It was, he'd whispered with his last breath, a key artery through which the dark lifeblood of the opium trade pulsed into the city. Armed with this grim knowledge, Holmes and I set forth the following morning, the grey London sky pressing down upon us like a shroud. His voice was sharp, cutting through the damp air as our hansom clattered over the cobbles. "The physical confrontation yields its own rewards, Watson, but it is the quiet observation of the trade's sinews that will lead us to Moran's masters, and perhaps to Moran himself. This Finnegan's Rest is but the first link. We must observe its activities with utmost discretion," Sherlock Holmes said. Accordingly, our first vigil commenced near a narrow, refuse-strewn alleyway not far from the supposed Rest. The reek of stale beer and unnameable filth assailed my nostrils. I whispered, "A vile place for any transaction, Holmes," Dr. John Watson commented. Holmes replied in a low tone, his gaze sweeping the alley. "Indeed, Watson, such environments are the natural habitat for these dealings," declared Sherlock Holmes. From the shadows, we watched as two figures met. A furtive exchange, a clink of coin barely audible above the distant rumble of drays, and then they melted back into the grimy labyrinth. A small, oilskin-wrapped packet had changed hands. He murmured, his eyes like chips of ice. "Note the precision, Watson, the brevity. This is not casual vice. It is organized, efficient. The tendrils of this network are widespread and well-established. Our next descent took us into the very belly of the beast, an opium den, its location hinted at by our earlier observation. The air within assaulted our senses, thick, cloying, heavy, with sickly sweet smoke. In the dim lamplight, the fumes seemed to coil and writhe like living things. I could not help but remark, my handkerchief to my nose. The very air is poisonous here. Dr. John Watson replied. Holmes nodded grimly. It is the scent of despair, Watson, and immense profit for some, declared Sherlock Holmes. Here, human wreckage was strewn about like flotsam. I saw a young man, his face pale and drawn, his fine coat now threadbare, offer a tarnished silver locket to the den's proprietor, his hand trembling visibly. Good heavens, Holmes, I muttered, my voice thick with revulsion. I swallowed hard before continuing. The sheer degradation. It's beyond words. Dr. John Watson inquired. His reply was low, almost a whisper, yet carried an immense weight. Each puff of that pipe, Watson, represents profit for men like our quarry. This is the true currency of their empire, shattered lives and stolen futures, replied Sherlock Holmes. The proprietor, a stoic Chinaman with eyes that missed nothing, accepted the locket with a curt nod, pushing a prepared pipe towards the desperate fellow. The sight was profoundly unsettling. As we stepped out of the den, the relative freshness of the outside air doing little to clear the images from my mind, I asked, is there no end to this misery, Holmes? Where does this path lead us next? Asked Dr. John Watson. Holmes paused, his expression thoughtful. Patience, my dear Watson. Each thread, however grim, adds to the tapestry. I have learned of another victim, one whose suffering is of a different, yet related, kind. Let us see where that takes us, declared Sherlock Holmes. Later that afternoon, guided by Holmes's uncanny ability to read the city's undercurrents, we found ourselves before a modest terraced house, its curtains drawn, a funereal silence hanging over it. A quiet knock brought a woman to the door, her face a mask of grief, her eyes red-rimmed from weeping. She was the widow, we learned, of a once prosperous shipping clerk whose name had appeared in connection with one of the murdered merchants. Addiction, she explained in a voice choked with sorrow, had consumed him, his position, and finally his life, leaving her and her children destitute. Holmes murmured, his voice barely audible above the widow's quiet sobs. The full measure of the cost, Watson, beyond the ledgers and the darks, Sherlock Holmes said. The quiet despair in that small parlor, the faint sound of a child's cough from an upper room, spoke more eloquently of the trade's evil than any sermon. As we walked away, the sounds of the bustling city seemed, for a moment, to recede. The weight of what we had witnessed settled heavily upon me. It is a monstrous business, Holmes, I said, the words inadequate, to see its effects so directly. Dr. John Watson said. He nodded, his gaze fixed on some distant point. Indeed, Watson. The abstract evil of the opium figures in ledgers takes on a very tangible human form when one walks these paths. These assassins, more in chief amongst them, are but the enforcers of this misery. They protect not just cargo, but this entire edifice of corruption, replied Sherlock Holmes. A new steel entered his voice, a hardening of his already formidable resolve. And it is by understanding the roots of this poison, the dependencies it creates, and the desperation it breeds, that we shall find the weaknesses in their fortress. Moran believes himself a shadow, but even shadows are cast by something substantial. We have seen that substance today, Watson. And now, I believe, I see how to bring him into the light, declared Sherlock Holmes. The implication was clear. The day's grim tour had not merely deepened his understanding of the moral quagmire, but had also illuminated the path towards Moran's capture. The game, I sensed, was about to take a decisive turn. The previous days, filled with the grim realities of the opium dens and the sorrowful tales of its victims, had cast a somber pall over our investigations. Yet, as I found myself in a sparsely furnished upper room, the precise location of which I was only vaguely aware, a different tension permeated the air. A clock ticked somewhere nearby, its rhythm a counterpoint to the city's distant hum. It was a chamber procured by Mycroft, anonymous and secure, the muffled rumble of London's traffic barely penetrating its thick walls. A solitary gas lamp cast long, dancing shadows, illuminating the faces of the three men who were to be Colonel Moran's undoing. Holmes loomed over a large map of London, spread across a plain wooden table. The soft rustle of paper accompanied the movement of his finger as it traced a complex route through the city's labyrinthine streets. Mycroft, ever the embodiment of governmental gravitas, observed with a keen, assessing eye, his hands clasped behind his back. Beside him, Mr. Lin Feng, enigmatic as always, watched Holmes with an unreadable calm, his presence a quiet counterpoint to the palpable energy emanating from my friend. Holmes's voice, when he finally spoke, was low, yet it cut through the quiet room with the sharp edge of conviction. Our colonel, gentleman, is a creature of habit, despite his cunning. The Shanghai cipher, combined with our knowledge of his subordinates' escape through the borough markets, reveals a distinct pattern, explained Sherlock Holmes. He prefers avenues that offer the illusion of multiple retreats, yet invariably chooses the path of least apparent resistance when pressed. Sherlock Holmes responded. His finger tapped sharply upon a particular junction near the docks. The sound was decisive in the stillness, followed only by the faint, steady hiss of the gas jet. His arrogance, explained Sherlock Holmes. Holmes said, his voice low and intense. His belief in his own martial superiority will be his downfall. He anticipates pursuit, yes, but he does not anticipate a snare constructed from his own psychology, remarked Sherlock Holmes. Mycroft inclined his head, his tone measured and devoid of inflection, the rustle of his starched collar a subtle sound in the room. The resources you requested are in place, Sherlock. Whispers of a compromised informant, a crucial meeting hastily arranged. These seeds have been sown in fertile ground, said Mycroft Holmes. The usual channels will carry the scent of opportunity directly to Moran's nostrils, answered Mycroft Holmes. Holmes nodded, a flicker of grim satisfaction in his eyes. Precisely, Mycroft. He will believe he is exploiting a weakness, a crack in our defenses. Mr. Lin, your part in this is no less vital, Sherlock Holmes said. Mr. Lin Feng's reply was soft, his voice barely disturbing the quiet, yet each word was chosen with deliberation. My network has already begun to circulate corroborating details, false sightings that will guide him, responded Mr. Lin Feng. We shall confirm his approach to the designated area. He will believe he moves unseen, while every step is anticipated. Holmes then elaborated on the intricacies of the plan, his words painting a vivid picture of the coming confrontation. It was a masterpiece of misdirection. The strategy was designed to funnel Moran towards a specific warehouse district, a place seemingly offering escape, but in reality, a carefully constructed cul-de-sac. I could almost hear the distant clang of metal from the docks as he spoke of it. I listened, my admiration growing with each revealed layer. The rhythmic tick-tock of the unseen clock seemed to mark the unfolding of their strategy. Holmes detailed how Moran's known reliance on swift, decisive action, when cornered, would be used against him, how his very training would dictate a response that led directly into their hands. He turned briefly to me, the gaslight glinting in his keen eyes. Consider the affair of the air gun, Watson. Recall the ingenious malevolence of that weapon, its silent delivery of death from afar, demanding meticulous planning and an iron nerve. Moran prides himself on such calculated control. When that control is challenged, when he feels the walls closing in, he will default to that same meticulous, yet predictable, pattern of seeking a single, seemingly secure, avenue of escape. We shall provide him with but one such apparent path, a path leading directly to us, explained Sherlock Holmes. The detail was chilling, yet undeniably logical. A shiver ran down my spine, despite the stuffy air of the room. Holmes outlined the use of decoys, the precise timing of each movement. He even described how the ubiquitous London fog, its damp chill almost palpable in his description. So often a villain's cloak, would this night become our ally? Mycroft, his expression unreadable as ever, added his confirmation. His voice, the calm pronouncement of state machinery, seemed to carry the weight of official seals and documents. The constables are briefed, Sherlock. Discreet, reliable men. They will form the outer cordon, ready to close the net once Moran is engaged, Mycroft Holmes said. A gust of wind rattled a window pane somewhere in the old building, a sudden, sharp sound that underscored my own unease. It is an audacious scheme, Holmes, I ventured, my voice perhaps a little louder than intended after the sudden noise. But Moran is a desperate and dangerous man, Dr. John Watson added. A thin smile touched Holmes's lips, a fleeting expression in the flickering gaslight. Indeed, Watson, and it is precisely that desperation we shall exploit. The intelligence from Shanghai, Moran's operational history, his psychological profile, all pieces of an elaborate puzzle, replied Sherlock Holmes. Now, he concluded, his voice dropping slightly, the final piece is about to be placed, remarked Sherlock Holmes. He looked from Mycroft to Mr. Lin Feng, a silent understanding passing between them. The air thickened with unspoken accord. The faint creak of a floorboard somewhere in the building, then the distant chime of a city clock striking the hour, were the only interruptions to the heavy silence that followed. The trap was meticulously prepared, the bait laid. All that remained was for the shadow of Colonel Moran to fall across it. A thick, yellow fog blanketed London, muffling the city's usual clamor to a distant, ghostly whisper. Gas lamps cast feeble halos, swallowed by the miasma. Beside me, Holmes stood statue. Still, his keen profile outlined against the faint glow, focused on the alleyway opposite. The air, cold and damp, carried the acrid scent of coal smoke and the river. His voice was a low murmur, barely disturbing the silence. He is late, Watson, but he will come. Pride, as ever, is Moran's Achilles' heel, Sherlock Holmes pointed out. As if summoned, a figure detached itself from the alley's deeper gloom. He moved with a silent, predatory tread. Even in the poor light, his military precision was undeniable. Holmes straightened, my pulse quickened. He stepped forward, his voice clear and sharp through the fog. Colonel Sebastian Moran, I have been expecting you, Sherlock Holmes responded. The figure froze. For a heartbeat, all was still. Then, with surprising speed, Moran turned and bolted, not into the alley, but out to the thoroughfare, vanishing into the fog. The rap of his boots on the cobbles echoed briefly, then was lost. After him, Watson. Davies' men will be covering the prearranged routes, but Moran is a fox. He will not run straight, stated Sherlock Holmes. We plunged into the opaque yellow wall. The chase became a blur of fleeting glimpses and disorienting sounds. Distant police whistles shrilled. Moran was a phantom, his passage marked by a startled cry or an overturned dustbin. Suddenly, a clatter of footsteps echoed from a side alley to our right, drawing a shout from one of Davies' men. "A feint, Watson," Holmes cried without breaking stride. "The sound is too deliberate, designed to split our pursuit. He continues ahead," Sherlock Holmes responded. Indeed, moments later, as we navigated a particularly narrow passage, a heavy fishmonger's barrow, laden with empty crates, suddenly careened down the slight incline towards us from a side entrance. Only Holmes's sharp cry, and a desperate leap aside, saved us from being bowled over. "He uses the terrain like a veteran campaigner, Watson," Holmes panted. "Quick, before he gains too much ground," Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. I gasped, nearly colliding with a lamppost. "Blast this fog, Holmes. We might as well be chasing a phantom," Dr. John Watson replied. Before Holmes could reply, we rounded a corner into what seemed a dead end, the fog swirling around towering stacks of tea chests. For an instant, I believed we had him trapped. Then a dark shape detached itself from the shadows atop the highest stack. A length of heavy timber, dislodged with calculated force, whistled down, crashing precisely where Holmes had stood but a moment prior. He had sidestepped with the agility of a cat, his breath coming in sharp bursts, but his eyes alight with the thrill of the chase. A crude attempt, but it speaks to his desperation, Holmes exclaimed, his voice cutting through the fog. He seeks the warren of streets near the docks, Watson. Typical. Observe the scuff marks on that low wall. He vaulted it, conserving energy but taking risks. He believes his agility will serve him. Inspector Davies, to the east. Cut him off before Mercer's passage, Sherlock Holmes said. Inspector Davies' gruff shout answered from our left, followed by thudding boots. The fog swirled, thinning momentarily. I saw Moran scramble over crates, eel-like in his nimbleness. A sharp crack echoed. I realized with a chill he had fired a diversion, perhaps. The bullet whined harmlessly into the brickwork above. Holmes anticipated Moran's every move, leading us through a maze of alleys. His rapid-fire deductions guided our pursuit, slowly but surely cornering our cunning quarry. At last, in a tight cul-de-sac reeking of stale beer and decay, the chase ended violently. Moran, escape route blocked by two constables from a darkened doorway, spun like a cornered tiger. A long, slender knife appeared magically in his hand, gleaming dully in faint light from a grimy window. His voice was a low, desperate snarl, his breath rasping. You'll not see me stand trial, Holmes. A soldier meets his end on his feet, not in your squalid courts, responded Colonel Sebastian Moran. He lunged not at Holmes, but at the nearest constable. But Holmes was faster. His cane, a seemingly innocuous walking stick, flicked out, striking Moran's wrist with a sickening thud. The knife clattered to the wet stones. Before Moran could recover, Davies and another officer were upon him, bearing him down despite his furious struggles. The sounds of the fight were brief but brutal grunts, the thud of bodies, a strangled curse from Moran. Within moments it was over. Colonel Sebastian Moran, renowned hunter and assassin, lay panting, wrists securely bound. Inspector Davies, face flushed, straightened, adjusting his helmet. He managed a breathless, "That was a proper runaround, Mr. Holmes. A nasty piece of work, this one. Good to have him collared, and it's your sharp work we thank for it, sir," replied Inspector Davies. Holmes retrieved Moran's fallen knife, examined it briefly, then handed it to the inspector. His eyes fixed on their subdued captive, his tone thoughtful. Indeed, Inspector, a most capable enforcer. Yet an enforcer is merely a tool. Our work, I fear, is far from concluded. We have snared a deadly serpent, but the nest remains, replied Sherlock Holmes. His words hung in the damp air, a clear sign that this capture, however significant, was but one step towards unraveling a greater, more shadowy conspiracy. The Diogenes Club's weighty silence enveloped us, a stillness almost palpable. Beyond the heavy draperies of the stranger's room, London's evening traffic was but a distant rumble. Colonel Moran was, at last, secured, his reign of terror concluded after a pursuit that had tested even Holmes's formidable abilities. Mycroft sat opposite us, his large frame filling the armchair, his expression one of grave contemplation. The only sound for a long moment was the faint rustle as he adjusted his spectacles. His voice, when it came, was low and resonant, barely disturbing the quiet. A commendable piece of work, Sherlock. The apprehension of Colonel Moran removes an immediate and dangerous threat. Yet the larger question of this Shanghai shadow remains, said Mycroft Holmes. Holmes, who had been gazing into the heart of the unlit fireplace, steepled his fingers. His eyes, bright and alert, shifted from the grate to his brother, then to me. Indeed, Mycroft, and it is here that the gravest misapprehension has lain. The Shanghai shadow, as we have termed it, is not, nor ever was, a single individual, explained Sherlock Holmes. I confess, a shiver ran down my spine at his words, despite the warmth of the room. The notion of an adversary more nebulous, more pervasive than a solitary assassin, was deeply unsettling. "No, gentlemen," Holmes continued, his tone incisive. "The Shanghai Shadow is not a man, but a vast, clandestine organization. An international consortium, a malignant enterprise rooted deep in the commerce of Shanghai and London alike. It is a blight spreading through the very arteries of trade," declared Sherlock Holmes. He paused, allowing the weight of his revelation to settle. The air seemed to grow heavier, charged with the enormity of his disclosure. Its structure is hierarchical and meticulously organized. At its summit are individuals in Shanghai. Their identities are likely shielded by layers of legitimate business, and they direct the grand strategy. Beneath them, regional directors manage operations across continents. And then we find men like Morin. He was no mere hired gun, Watson. Colonel Sebastian Morin served as a principal enforcer. He was a high-ranking operative, responsible for discipline and for eliminating threats. He also ensured the smooth, albeit illicit, flow of their damnable opium. "Good heavens, Holmes," Dr. John Watson inquired. I exclaimed, my voice hushed. "A veritable empire of crime," responded Dr. John Watson. "Precisely. An empire built upon addiction and maintained by fear. Its tendrils extend into shipping, into finance, into seemingly respectable trading houses. They corrupt, they intimidate, and as we have seen, they eliminate any who stand in their path or threaten their profits. Morin's assassinations were not the random acts of a lone wolf. Rather, they were strategic removals sanctioned by this hidden directorate," explained Sherlock Holmes. Mycroft nodded slowly, his gaze distant. "Such an entity, with its binational reach, poses a significant challenge to governance far beyond mere criminality. Its influence could permeate levels we have yet to comprehend," remarked Mycroft Holmes. "It does," stated Sherlock Holmes. Holmes affirmed, his voice dropping slightly. "And therein lies the sobering truth. We have apprehended a dangerous limb of this creature, perhaps even crippled one of its primary offensive arms in Europe. But the body, the pervasive network itself, remains. Its leadership, for the most part, resides far beyond our immediate jurisdiction. They are protected by distance and by the very wealth their nefarious trade generates." He rose then and walked towards the window, peering out into the London night, as if he could see the shadowy connections snaking through the city's veins. The distant clip-clop of a hansom cab's hooves on the pavement below was, for a moment, the only sound. The moral ambiguities of empire, Watson, often provide fertile ground for such enterprises to flourish. We profit from the very trade that empowers these shadows. Morin is caged, yes. Justice, in his case, will be served. But the fight against this larger Shanghai shadow, that is a battle that will continue long after this particular case is closed. His words hung in the air, a chilling epitaph to our recent endeavors. Though a notorious villain was now behind bars, the true enemy, this insidious and sprawling organization, remained a formidable and shadowy presence. The victory felt significant, yet undeniably incomplete, a stark reminder of the deep-seated corruption that could thrive in the hidden corners of our world, a corruption that cast a long and ominous shadow indeed.